My name is Ferdinand M. Comolli. I'm currently 90 years old, but 70 years ago is when I enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Force. It was on December 7th, 1942, exactly 1 year after Pearl Harbor Day. They did let me finish my college education, so I didn't have to report to duty until February 15th of 1942. From then on, I'm going to take you on my 3 years of training and my war service in Europe, flying over Germany until the end of the war. On February 15th, I reported for duty, and they shipped me from Rhode Island to Atlantic City, New Jersey, and its famous boardwalk. Of course, it was February, it was cold, and there weren't many people there, all except young recruits. It was basic training. They issued our clothing, and we had KP. We had to march on the boardwalk, and on the boardwalk we had to walk out of cadence because we couldn't be in uniform there because it would collapse the boardwalk. Now you can see from the pictures that the hotels are there. One of them was the Dennis Hotel, and while I was there, I got the measles, the real German measles, and there was a big epidemic. They had at least 500 of us in this one hotel for a week. And then we left from there and were shipped to Buffalo, and Buffalo, University of Buffalo, for pre-training. We had to take physics courses and math courses and weather courses, and we did have time to see the Niagara Falls and the city. While we were there, we had free time. The residents were very good to us at that time. The residents would invite us to their homes for dinner. And another unusual thing, instead of having the bugle wake us up in the morning, we woke up to the tune of Boogie Woogie. Upon leaving Niagara Falls, we went to a brief stop in Tennessee to have physical and medical checkups. And then we went on to Florida, to the Lodwick School of Aeronautics Incorporated. The Lodwick School was taken over by the U.S. Air Force, and we had lots of classroom work and lots of flying time. It's really where I learned to fly. Now we flew in a PT-17, a biplane like you see in the picture. The instructor sat in the back, I sat in the front, open air. It was kind of cold in Florida, but we used to talk through a tube. He yelled at me when I was doing something wrong. After about 10 hours of flying together, I learned to fly solo. I'd take my first solo flight, and then we would fly together, and I'd fly solo from this airfield to many of the different little communities, grass strips nearby Lakeland. And after that, we learned acrobatics. We had to learn all these maneuvers in order to be able to take an evasive action in case of a dogfight. We had to learn what the airplane would take, what it would do, and it was a lot of fun doing all the different flights. In addition to these maneuvers, we had to actually stall the plane out, go into a spin from 10,000 feet down to about 5, and then take it out of the spin and start the plane again. And you can do those things, and we learned how to do it. That's a picture of me graduating from primary training and going to basic training in Cortland, Alabama. In Cortland, Alabama, we went to a stronger, bigger plane, a single wing instead of bi-wing. Again, I was in the front, the instructor in the back. We learned to do more formation flying and flying from different distances. Not so many acrobatics as we did with just learning to fly a stronger plane. Now in Cortland, which is in northern Alabama, we were in very crude barracks using tar paper on the sides. You might wonder why tar paper. Tar paper is easy to use and it's waterproof. Our next stop was advanced training in the AT-6. As you see the picture, again, it's a two-man plane, single wing, much more powerful than the one in basic training. This was in Selma, Alabama, not far from west of Montgomery, and this was our final training before being promoted to lieutenant. We did a lot of formation flying because in Europe we had to get into formation as quickly as we could to save fuel before taking off for the target. One of the things we had to learn in advanced training was to fly at night by ourselves. We had to fly from Selma to Montgomery all the way north, but using beacons. No radio. We had radio, but we didn't use it. We were by ourselves. A solo flight at night across to the northern part of Alabama and back to Selma and land at night. That was quite an experience. At the conclusion of our training, we were promoted to second lieutenant and received our wings. And we're ready for the next big step, getting ready for combat in Europe. I was so happy that we made it, I sent a telegram to my dad and to my mom, telling them that I made it and I was celebrating with my friend. This picture shows part of our celebration after graduating from Selma. And then we were going to go to the next step, which is in Maxwell Field. The next step in my training, as you can see by the plane, is no longer a two-seater. Now you got to fly by yourself. You got to know what you're doing. No instructor in the back seat to help you out. So we had to learn to fly the P-40. We only did it for 10 hours, but that was to get a transition from the A-6 to a bigger plane. Our next step is going to be a much bigger one, the P-47, which I really had to learn because that's what I was going to fly in Europe. This is the P47D, which is the plane I'm going to fly in combat. I've got to learn a lot about it. Again, no instructor behind me. I'm doing it by myself. And I have to do a lot of learning because it's a powerful plane, lots of instrumentation, and I have to know the mileage, how far I can go so I can get back home, all kinds of information where the gas tank is located. And all this training is going to take place in North Carolina at Johnson Field in Goldsboro, North Carolina. This is the kind of equipment they'll be wearing in combat, in goggles, earphones, and an oxygen mask, which we always had to wear above 10,000 feet. And in the P-47, you can see there's a dashboard in the front with all kinds of gauges and switches and things that you need to memorize and know what each one is for and what to do if there's a problem. And this is the right side, which has the radio and oxygen controls. You need to know how to operate them all. Of course, the oxygen is very important. On the left-hand side, there's the controls for the flaps and the ailerons and the water injection and other tools that I need to operate the plane. We actually operate the plane by flying with a stick, not a wheel. And on the stick, we had our trigger for the guns and our button for the bomb drop. On one of our training missions, as we were taking off one at a time, the pilot behind me mistook the signal and he took off at almost the same time as I did, without realizing that in one of these planes, when you go down the runway, until your tail comes up, you can't see what's in front of you. And he ran into my plane and chewed it up to my back end. I almost died. Fortunately for me, the gas tank is sitting on it. It did not ignite, and the plane didn't burn, and I didn't get hurt. The next step was to go to Dover, Delaware, and there we still used the P-47, but we used it for gunnery training. We actually did our ground gunnery at targets that are located in what is now the Wildlife Preserve along the Delaware Bay, and we flew down the river and flew up 10,000, 12,000 feet and did some aerial gunnery at a target towed behind a plane. And then we came back up to base at water level, up the Delaware River, back to the Dover Air Base that is now the C-5 base for the U.S. Air Force. From Dover, we went to Richmond, Virginia to get ready to go overseas. We had to get our foot lockers all packed up and ready, all the instructions for going on a ship. And we did go out of Norfolk on the Aquitania, one of the last of the four stackers, very much like the Titanic. We went across the ocean unescorted, no submarines, no escort ships, and went down south and up north. We zigzagged across. One day it would be cold, the next day it would be hot, but we made it across and landed in Midlands of England. From the Midlands of England, we flew to Paris for one day and one night. We did get out to see a little bit of Paris and some of the sights, and I slept in a tent on the lawn of the Rothschild estate in Paris, and then the next day we were flown to Dole. Here's an overall map of the locations we were stationed at. We started out at Dole in France, and then we moved up to Tantonville, and then to Metz, and then to Frankfurt, and finally to Nuremberg. Each time that our troops moved forward, we followed to be as close to them as we could, so that we would be able to spend more time in the air helping them advance. Let's start with Dole. One of the first things we had to do is learn to read maps, because we didn't have GPS, and really it's the job of the leader to get us to the site and back, but if we ever got separated, we have to use the maps to find our way back. Now this picture shows a Jeep, and that's how they transported us from our accommodations to the site, the field where we're going to take off. This shows a flight on the way to one of the targets. We always flew in flights of 4. And again, these are not my planes, but some simulations showing how we flew in a group of 4, watching each other partner so that we could see if there was any planes coming. This picture shows me sitting on this gasoline belly tank. Quite often, if we were going to go on a longer mission, we'd use the gas out of this tank until it went empty, switch to the inner tank, and just drop the tank, and wherever we were, it was expendable. This picture shows a flight of 4, shows us peeling off for a dive bomb. One at a time, a few seconds later, we'd all take our turns at dive bombing the target. And then we would return. This shows one of us landing. And in Dole, the people were very happy to see us there, and we got to meet some of the kids and all, and they're all very friendly. This is a picture of a couple of shots of me with my plane before we took off. These are my superior officers giving me some pointers on using the plane. Now, this is a picture of the plane that I flew on my first mission into enemy territory. 4W was the symbol for all of our flight planes, and it was kind of scary, that first one, not knowing what I'd find over there or whether I'd ever come back. One of the main targets was a Maginot Line between the two, and then we went into Germany and looked for more bridges and enemy trains to destroy. We came back successfully, and that was #1 under my belt. From this point on, I flew about 10 missions out of Dole, and then we moved on up behind the advancing people, and our next place was Tantonville. In Tantonville, we had a few obstacles to overcome. One of them was to get a runway. As you can see in the front there, the mesh metal pieces that the engineers had to put down. In fact, they even had a slope on it. The slope on the mesh runway made it more difficult because it wasn't flat. It was like going uphill. But it worked out. And then we had another big obstacle, which was the snow. We had a big snowstorm. And then during that snowstorm, we even had to use the planes to blow the snow off the runway. Now, the scarf you see is made of silk from an old parachute, and it did keep us nice and warm. And here's some more shots of the snow and the planes and what we had to go through. These are some shots, not of my planes, but of people taking off with the metal runway. This is a view of me going down the runway. We always took off, whenever possible, 2 at a time to save on gas when we were assembling our 16 planes in our squadron flights before taking off for the mission. There we are, all assembled and heading towards our target over Germany somewhere. That was the leader's job to get us there. The rest of us had to look for enemy planes and keep in flight. And if the enemy did come, we'd separate in pairs of 2. Now this picture shows the destruction of a convoy. It was one of our best missions. We were able to shoot out the beginning and the end of the convoy, and all the guys just ran away, all the drivers, and we took turns coming down and shooting up jeeps and other equipment. And I even flew 2 missions that day back, and we really did a lot of destruction. This picture shows a friend of mine from Rhode Island using my plane. His name is William Jack, and he went on to be a general. He stayed in and became a general in the flight service. Okay, now this is just a view from my wing camera, and these are some shots, not that I made, but were taken, just so you get some idea what it's like when you're flying at a target and shooting it with guns or dropping bombs. You can see some of the misses and some of the good hits. Here are some shots of my friends in Tantonville, different parts. And there I am again. That was one of our quarters we'd taken over. Here are just some shots of rail yards in the area showing what was left after we had bombed them. And now we move on to our next location, which is Metz. Metz was a very large French airport which the Germans had taken over. And during our moving forward, we bombed and destroyed a lot of planes, German planes, that were stationed at Metz. We had a lot of this to clean up, but we took over the airport. From the airport at Metz, we did a lot of supporting of Patton and his advance. We were using the Metz airport to go, our primary mission was to help Patton. If they had a problem ahead of them, they would send smoke bombs, and we would strafe it or dive bomb it, and then we'd go for a secondary mission. This just shows a shot of one of the targets that we did hit. And while we were in Metz, we were granted a 7-day leave of absence, and 4 of my fellow pilots and I went in Riviera, stayed in a beautiful hotel, and there weren't many tourists there because it was all Army, but we enjoyed the warm weather and the beautiful Mediterranean, which was really blue, and it shows us relaxing. They gave us bikes to use, and we just enjoyed the scenery and the countryside for 7 days, and then we had to go back to Metz. During one of my missions, I did get shot at. Of course, on many of them I got shot at, but you never know whether you're hit or not. But in this particular one, enough of the shrapnel hit my belly tank, my gas tank, and I ran out of gas before I could get back to our site. So I had to pick out a field, made a wheels-up belly landing in the pasture, knocked down a few small trees, and escaped without any injury. Following are some pictures that were taken from the aerial camera. Those are the 2 bombs, 500-pounders, one on each wing. Just some shots there of me in the area, still at Metz, with one of my buddies. And that's my plane, the 4W planes flying. And one of the targets we hit. Another one from the aerial cameras. Show them we did hit a lot of targets. We missed a few, but most of the time we hit them. And now I'd like to talk about one of the missions where I was the flight leader and took our squadron all the way from Metz to Prague, Czechoslovakia, all the way across Germany. While we were there, we strafed and bombed ammunition trains and locomotives, and I personally, being the leader, had to safely bring back the whole squadron to Metz. As a result of that venture, I was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, which I'd like to read the article that they wrote when they wrote it up. During my stay, I flew 73 missions over Germany. And one of them, I was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. And here's what they used to describe the reason I got the award. For extraordinary achievement in aerial flight against the enemy on the 26th of April, 1945, while leading an armed reconnaissance in the vicinity of Prague, Czechoslovakia, Lieutenant Comolli observed a locomotive in the marshalling yard, which he destroyed the target in a low-level strafing attack. In the course of this attack, he sighted 3 additional locomotives, and despite the fact that the enemy defenses were thoroughly alerted, he nevertheless continued his vigorous assault and destroyed them, starting fires among the tank cars and silenced one of the anti-aircraft guns in the yard. His coolness, and in the face of great personal danger, as well as his superior airmanship and devoted to duty, were in keeping with the highest traditions of the Army Air Forces. And it wasn't just me that did all the shooting. As they described, all my buddies were right with me, also destroying many of the rail cars and the ammunition train and all the explosions we made. And the next thing we did, we safely came back all the way from Czechoslovakia to our home base. We moved to Frankfurt, where we continued to help Patton, and then our next stop was Nuremberg, where the war ended. This picture shows the awards that I got. The Air Medal, which you got one cluster for every 5 flights that you flew. That's the Air Medal. This shows the wings that I got when I graduated and the symbol from the 9th Air Force that we wore as a patch on our sleeve. And this is the Distinguished Flying Cross, which I have already described how I was awarded it. And now the war ended and I was flown home, and these are pictures of my family. welcomed me home. One last thing I'd like to recommend is you listen to an attachment that Alan's going to put onto this show. It's called Thunderbolts, The Conquest of the Reich by the History Channel. It depicts somebody else, another flight and group, doing exactly what I did during my stay in Europe. I think you'll enjoy it.